Hey everybody, it's David R. Becker here with BeckerArt, and here today to give you a small tip, a really important tip. You always hear the phrase, practice makes perfect, right? Well, that's pretty true. And so we're going to show you today how to use your brushes. Your brushes never come with instructions. You always get them in there, and you're always bending them, and you're always looking and seeing how fine a point they are. But they come like this in the store. There's no instructions on how to use these things. And so you have to practice. And so a lot of times when you're at the store, let me just take you over to the tabletop here. A lot of times when you're at the store, you may find they have these things. This is a Buddha board. And so what this this is sometimes what they have at the stores where you open it up here, it goes to an easel, but we're just going to keep it flat like this. And so what we're going to do is this is a board that you can make wet, and it'll dry up back to this, and so you can practice with your brushes. They'll have little boards like this at the store, and you just see how your brush handles basically. But I use it because you can use it to try brush strokes, try to do a brush stroke, try to do a certain type of brush stroke with it, and practice. You need to practice with these brushes because you don't know what they can do, or you want to know what they can do as much as possible. What are the things that can happen when you're putting paint to paper? When this is just like a fake sheet of paper, and what you can do is a lot of times when you're using a rigger brush is basically for drawing really thin lines. And I always tell, I just did a demonstration where I had to do really long, slender lines. Well, to practice it, you can this just takes water. Basically, you just take clean water, and I'm gonna have some clean water right here. And I'm gonna do this first before I do the paper stuff. And so here, I'll just kind of practice doing a small line, and see how it turns black. And it turns black from water, and then it'll dry back to clear. And so let me just do a bigger brush stroke so you can see. So let's say you're doing a one brush stroke and you're just trying to see what this brush can do. So I'm just going to go like that, and this is just basically a board that will make it dark from the water. And so you can see what your brush stroke, how to use your brush. What does your brush do that's different when you're holding it this way or that way or whatever way. You have to practice with your brushes. You have to kind of know how to handle your brush. Again, there's no instructions, so you need to understand that you have to figure out a way of using brushes. Like if you're putting on a big wash, let's say you're putting on a big wash of water like that. Do you use the side of your brush? Do you use the front of your brush? Do you use a different brush? It's all about knowing and practicing with your brushes, but not doing a painting. Don't do a painting when you're practicing with your brush. This again is called a Buddha board, and you can see here, it turns black, and those first ones, see how those dried up already? So it'll dry up on you, and then you have and you're not wasting any paper, basically. So these Buddha boards are great for just like trying to figure out how thick the thin brush stroke, thick the thin. You can just kind of feel it and just see how that works, the brush, and see how find a point you can get to it, and how far, when you push it down, how thick it can get. So that's a Buddha board, and it's for practicing. But now the other thing you got to do is practice on your sheet of paper with what you're going to paint on. So here I normally use Stonehenge Aqua. This is a hot press. So I have a hot press here, and I have Stonehenge cold press here. And you should be practicing also on the different papers with different brushes. So let's say, for instance, I'm just practicing with this brush. What can this brush do for me? This brush can be, it's a flat brush, so I can get a lot of rectangular shapes, right? So practice, rectangular shape. I'll do everything in red here. Let's just do everything red in this dirty palette here. And so I'm going to take red and then my dirty palette. And also it depends on when you're practicing, how much pigment you put down, how much water you put on. And so it's all about practicing how to use your brush. Nothing about painting at all. You don't even think about painting. You just want to use the brush and try things. So here I'm going to do a rectangle. I'll do like a rectangle. And what happens is it bubbles up, or it fills up with water at the end, so you know that. And so those are things you got to just keep in mind when you then go ahead later on and maybe realize if you don't want that, maybe use a little bit more pigment, with less water, and maybe that wouldn't puddle then there. See, if I use a little bit more water, or if I go down, and if I don't want the puddle on the bottom. And then I can also make thin lines with this brush, this half brush, by using the tip of this brush. I can even just press it down like that. I can use it kind of like a round brush where I go thin to thick, back down to thin. You can do that with the round brush too, where you go thin to thick and back down to thin. just you're practicing what the brush can do. How can you handle it? What and people always ask me, man, you're always twisting your brush and you're turning it, and it seems like you can get a certain look with the way you're bending and flowing with your brush. Well, yes, I practice a lot. And sometimes instead of doodling on a sheet of paper with a pencil, I take a scrap sheet of paper, and I'll just start seeing what this brush can do. Like, what if I want really fine lines and I just want to make it look like grasses, or if I want to punch it down like this? What happens when you're doing your brush and what happens if I just push it straight down and just go like that? What happens if I do that? What do you get? Look at this. I got a nice butterfly right there. See how I can just go boom, and I can just get a certain look. That could be something. You don't know until you try and use your brush in every different way possible. Use a dry brush. Use it with hardly any paint in there, with a thick amount of paint, and see what happens when you go across the page quickly. You're getting a dry brush effect. These are things you need to know before. I mean, you have to know how to use your tools. Like if you're a carpenter, you know how to use a saw before you start and build a house. It's not going to work. It's not going to happen. You're not going to do it right. You may get a couple times to get good cuts, but you have to know how to use the brushes. So please, please, please take scrap sheet of paper and just work your brushes and try different things. I should make a list of all things you should try, but that's, just take your brush and do things that you don't think you can do. Maybe you can come up with something that I haven't come up with. My big thing is with my round brush, and so this is on hot press, so everything's smooth. Now when you do it on rough paper, this is cold press. If I do it on rough paper, then of course I can get different things. Like I can take it again, I can go across the page with a big wet brush, but just barely take it across to scumble it. You can see I can just scumble, and I can pick up the texture of the paper. I can also wet it real lot, and like this I can wet it, and it's not so great for making rectangles because the corners will not be sharp like if you use a flat brush. What I found out when you're using this brush, this round brush, and any round brush, is that if you bend it, if you push it down like this, and then bend back, oh boy, I'm out of focus here. Sorry about this. Come on, come into focus. There we go. So when you press your brush like this, you're using the side. You're pushing your brush into the paper like this. So I'm taking red, I'm pushing the brush. I'm pushing, and I'm using the bottom bristles compared to the top pointy ones. I'm bending them back, so I'm using the side. And I can then use and make a type of a pine tree or pine needle look. I can make that kind of look by just bending the brush back. And see, I'm pushing it, I'm taking it, I'm pushing it down, and I'm bending it this way. And so that's all cool. And so another thing to do is, wisping. Wisping, where you just take and you just really lightly go back and forth, and almost like a dry brush too, where the edges are a little hard edged. There's all kinds of things. How about tapping? Tapping your brushes and seeing how to tap two brushes together and get a good spatter. Get a good spatter effect, a good drop effect. These are all things you need to learn before you start doing paintings. Yes, it's easy to just remember when you're a kid and you used to just put on there, just rub it in. But you're not always just rubbing in the paint into the paper. You're never hardly rubbing. I'm always tapping like this. I'm pushing it around. I'm letting it float in my pigment in the water. When I put down water and I take big amounts of pigment, I float it in there. Know your brush. Know how to use it. And again, because there is no instructions, you have to learn it on your own, basically. So, and it's fun. It's fun to try to do different things. Again, trying to do those long lines. On cold press paper, you're probably going to make it a little bit more wet so that it goes into the crevices. So when you're making a long line, you have to realize you can't stop. Yesterday when I did this demonstration on Sunday, I did a demonstration and I had a bunch of lines like this where you can't go really slow like this and just hope that it gets really nice and even and straight. This you can go if you go real quickly in one shot. That's the easier way of doing it instead of trying to go slow. So just learning how to use your brush. And what else can this brush do? What if I tap it down like I'm drumming? Is that a certain look I can get? I'm not going to write down everything because it would take books and volumes to all the things you can possibly do with it. If you take this brush and you swirl it around like this, what will it give you? Take your brushes and practice. That's all I can say. That's all I have to say. And anything else I can think of that you have to... There's also different kinds of brushes. These are all watercolor brushes, and we got rounds and flats. They also make filberts. They make these these like ones that look like the dragon tongue. They make all kinds of brushes, and before you use them on your painting, definitely try to use them. I had this really long one that's like a pinstriping brush. It was real long. You have to practice with it and see what it can do to help you out. And when you're doing a painting, you're not quite sure what it is that you want on that painting, or if you do, and you think, oh, that's going to be great if I use this brush. This week, last week at my Thursday class, we tried to do crackle, like a crackle in porcelain. And so all I did was take my brush and I just went really like this. I went really slowly and just made a bunch of little lines to make it look like crackle. Is there another way that you can possibly think of? Is there another brush that you can do that with? So you decide and you figure it out. Figure it out and practice, practice, practice. Practice makes perfect, and it's so true with everything. So this week in my newsletter, I want you to just take your brushes and practice with them and show me some things that you had done that you couldn't believe that your brush does. This is one of my favorites, is bending the brush back to make pine needles. Just pushing it, and I never figured it out until I did practice one day on the thing. See how I can make it look round, and I can make look like. And so this is a brush that I'm kind of almost pushing in and wrecking the tip, because I'm pushing the tip backwards, and I'm using the back part of it. You can see that. See, I'm pushing the back part, and it's going in front. So it's just something that's different. You can also take it and again, like tap it. You know, we're using a watercolor brush, but it's not used the same for everything that you do, because you may want texture, you may want smoothness. There's so many different ways of using this brush. And also the amount of pigment you use, the amount of water you use, the type of paper you're using. You know, it's all part of the practice. And so practice, practice, practice. And I think that's all I need to say about this subject. But show me what you're doing with your brushes. And show me if you have a different kind of brush that is a little bit different from your average kind of brush, because I know there's a bunch of different kind of brushes. They have one here by Sterling Edwards that, there's a bunch of brushes I have. Let me show you a couple different brushes here. Here's a brush, a funny brush. This is a rubber band brush. Again, no instructions. It's just a bunch of rubber bands within this thing called a funny brush. And so you can just take that in there, and it's usually good for making leaves. See how it makes dots? And so you have to use a lot of paint. But until you know how to use it, this thing will look really funny to you, right? I mean, you're going to be looking at, when I first looked at this saying, well, how do I use this? Am I going to dip in? And can you use it for acrylics, oils? You know, whatever you do, you have to practice with it first. And here's a brush by Sterling Edwards. And when he uses this whole brush for his whole painting, which I can't do that, but I use his brush. I use his brush when it's like the edge right here is not soft, because I'm working on a hard edge. So if I wet this brush and then take it across a edge of paper that's dry, and then it'll make me a soft edge right there right away. It's a super great brush for making soft edges out of hard edges that are done on dry paper. You just take it across the dry paper. And also it's probably good for making texture stuff too, like in here. So if it's dry brushed, you can make a lot of textures. He uses, like I said, for me, he does washes and everything with his brush. So, but that's because he probably practiced with his brush, right? So he's probably practicing with his own brush. And I'm sure you can even scrape or whatever you can do with all this thing. And I'm not sure why the handle is like this, but hey, it's cool. It's his brush, and whatever brush you get, practice, practice, practice. All right. So until next tip, meet me on Thursday and get my newsletter. Go to my website, get my newsletter, because we paint every Thursday. Every Thursday at 6:30 Central Standard Time, we do a paint along, and it's in watercolor, sometimes on black paper, sometimes on white, and we're going to try different things this year as we go along. All right, so see you on Thursday or on my next tip. All right, here's BeckerArt signing out. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye, guys.